Hi, this is Tim Herzog, and today I'm going to be steam bending the teak transom for my Allied Seabreeze. So a bit of background to start here. First of all, this is part of a much larger project that I have pretty well documented on my blog, and I'll link to that in the video description. The second thing is that I'm going to be steam bending here on the vertical or the y-axis. So here's the transom. This is cut from about 2.5 inch square teak, and I've scarfed it together into and then cut it on the curve. That was all done with a jigsaw with a jigsaw. What I need to do is I need to steam bend this in the vertical dimension, or the Z dimension, and that's because the stern of my deck is curved. Now, it's not curved much. It's curved about 1.5 inches over, the entire transom is about 52 inches wide. It curves about 1.25 inches between the center and the port and starboard corners. So, but this is a thick enough piece of wood and a short enough piece of wood that I've been advised by people with more experience than me that a little bit of a steam bend there is probably a good idea, so that when the transom is secured to the deck, that it's not pulling up on the fiberglass deck. So that's what I've got. Now, just to kind of show you what this looks like, it's actually resting on the form, and I'll talk about the form in a second. But if I just kind of push this flat, you can kind of see sort of how much of a gap here. This transom as it sits is more or less flat at this point. Just so you can see what's going on here, it also has, I'm going to flip this over. Sorry for going off camera. Okay, and it has a bevel that's been sort of cut into the bottom there, and that's because the deck is not flush. There is a deck hull joint on the Seabreeze. That means that on the outer edge of the deck, there is about 1/3 to 1/2 inch of bevel around the outside. And again, there's a description of that on the blog. So and let me put this aside. Here is the form. So what I basically did was I took a template off the deck, and then I cut strips of 1-inch pine that are pretty close to the curve I see on my deck there. All right, and then I've got just a kind of a shelf here that matches that bevel that I cut out of the bottom. So that's going to be the form, and the idea is that we generate steam, and we're going to clamp it then vertically down onto this form. This is not the first time that I've done this on this particular piece of wood. I actually tried to steam bend it last week, and that I didn't get the bend that I wanted. It just didn't work. But I think that was because I didn't steam it long enough. So I'm going to try it again and steam it a lot longer. I'm also going to be using the plastic bag method that Louis Salzed has documented in videos. So I just want to give a quick shout out, a big shout out to Louis for providing that information. And I'm basically going to be trying to replicate his approach, which means after I rewatch the videos, that I'm going to steam it a lot longer, probably 2.5 hours. And then I'm going to attempt to, at least initially, clamp it down onto the form while it's still in the bag, and then keep steaming it for a little bit longer and see how that works. Okay, so I'm going to proceed to setup, and then I'll take more. Here's a quick update on the setup before we start to turn on the steam. We've got the transom here in the bag, and it's this. I'll show it to you. It's the sterilization tubing that they use for dental instruments. So it tolerates heat. It comes in big long tubes. You can get it online for fairly cheap. And I just cut a length of tube. Like the tube there. Here's the stuff, by the way. That's the stuff that I bought. Comes in a big roll like that. So you just put it in the tube. I put a couple clips on the end to hold it, and cut just a couple snips on either end to release steam so it doesn't turn into a balloon and explode. And then in the center, and I'll get to the steam generator, there's just a hose clamp around a brass fitting that's going to feed steam in from this tube. I'm using the this steam generator here that I got online. This is the one from Erlex Industries, and this is the one I used last week, and it worked great. So we'll fill that up in a second with steam. It takes about 15 minutes to start cranking through that tube. And then the other thing that I've got is somewhere around here. I'm just going to use an electric kettle like this to keep hot water kind of going on the side, so that as the Erlex starts to run low, I can fill it up with reasonably hot water and hopefully not lose a whole lot of time refilling and then having to reheat water. So that's it, I think, for now. Yeah, and then the other thing is I also have on this setup here, you can see I've got just little risers underneath that, so that as the tubing inflates, steam is actually getting at the wood from both sides, and I'll kind of adjust those. We'll see how that's going. I didn't do that last time. We'll see if that makes a difference this time. Update, we just turned the steam generator on about 10-12 minutes ago with hot water, and just started getting steam about 4 or 5 minutes ago. So you can see the bag is starting to inflate, and also starting to get wet, and it's already starting to get hot. So we'll leave it this way for a couple hours or so. And also, just to note, I replaced those bottom spacers with 2x4s because I'd like to be able to get under there, pull a spacer out, and just test the amount of bend I have at different points. So that's why it looks a little different than the last. We're getting a lot of steam, and that bag is fully inflated and hissing away. I just stopped the kettle because it was running low on water, and then refilled it. Stopped the steamer because it was running low on water, and refilled it from boiling water from the electric kettle. So the bag deflated, and it took about 90 seconds or so to both start regenerating steam that way, and then start to reinflate. So that's actually pretty efficient. You can see if I look below here that in between the supports, the bag is filling with water. So from time to time, I borrow a friend upstairs, and we basically pick up the timber, and we sort of pour the water down to one end, and then just like open the clamps real quick and pour the water out into a bucket down there. So that's how we're managing that. All right, we are just shy of the 3.5 hour mark, and we have moved off of the stands and onto the form. So we just picked the whole thing up, bag and all, and started clamping. One by one, clamped down fairly easily, not quite as supple as I wanted it to be at the end, so we'll kind of see how that works. Lots of clamps. One other point of worry is that the scarf joint in the middle definitely started to separate. So the epoxy started to give a little bit, so I put an extra number of clamps across the scarf joint to kind of hold that in place. Maybe I should have done that to begin with, but we'll see how that works. And I'm going to let this run for another hour or so, and we'll see how it goes. Okay, we are now 6 hours in. It's been steaming in the bag and in the brace now for that long, for 6 hours. And I've undone the end and basically tipped out all the residual water, basically by picking up the whole, workbench, workmate apparatus, and just kind of pouring it off the end. So now I'm going to start, cutting the bag off from the wood, and then releasing it one by one from the clamps, and then putting the clamps on to the wood without the plastic in place. The steaming is done. We're about 6 hours in, and I've disconnected the steamer and waited a few minutes, and then cut off the plastic, or at least the plastic on top, just to let the wood cool to the air. I did leave the plastic and the clamps here in the center around the scarf joint. I did not want to release those scarf joints. I'm going to leave that for a while, and I'll probably leave this here for a day, maybe even 2 days, just to be extra sure, and let this really clamp in here into the form, and we'll see how it goes. I've cut away the nylon sheathing in most places, so she's been dry to the air. And I'm about to release the clamps. I just wanted to kind of give a quick overview here. And then I'll set up the camera in a frame and start undoing the clamps. The one thing that I'm really concerned about at this point, and there's no getting around it, we'll just have to kind of deal with it, is right in there you can see the scarf join definitely slipped a little bit from what it was before, right there. So that's why the extra clamps are on there. I should have anticipated that a bit, that epoxy will take extreme temperatures for a short period of time, but if you steam it for 6 hours, yep, it's going to slip. So there's some slippage in there. I'm not at all sure what that scarf joint is going to do. We'll find out what we'd hit the clamps on, and we'll go from there. Okay, so here we are. I've got all the clamps off, except for one in the middle, and that's not really even doing anything. It's just kind of holding the teak in place on the form, and putting pressure on the front so that it sits on the front, on the front of the form, instead of kind of like leaning off towards the back. Other than that, the bend part went pretty well. If I get down here, you can see that it's very tight to that form. There's a little bit of gap on this end, but that's easy. I can just kind of squeeze that down with my fingers. That's going to give no give whatsoever. It'll be fine. And then on this side, now the one thing is that, yeah, 6 hours of steaming, and that epoxy scarf joint just completely let go whatsoever. It's almost like I never did it at all. But the wood's in really good shape. I should be able to mate that back together again as it was, with another epoxy scarf joint. And this time what I'll do is I'll use the form as a positioning tool so that it positions roughly like this, if you can kind of see that. So what that means is that it's going to be, I'll glue it back together again, but it will be this time glued together on the form, so it should fit the boat perfectly. It's a little high here, and it will be a little high here, but that's something I can just kind of work that out with a planer and a sander and some files and stuff like that to get that, looking good and nice and smooth. There's also a spot underneath here, if you see, where there's going to be a little bit of a space there, and I'll fill that with thickened epoxy too. So it'll be a combination of some filler. I'm using epoxy thickened with teak sawdust, so it looks, pretty good. And there are a couple other spots where the wood split in places, and I might try and provide some reinforcement there. And I'll do that all as a kind of a separate project. I think that's probably the end of this video, since it was really focusing on steam bend. So it went pretty well. A few happy accidents in the end, but I think bottom line is that this is gonna do the trick, and that's it. So I'll wrap this up and get this edited together and posted.